Hello, we at the Mr. CFD Group are honored to present you with training services. In this training chapter, we aim to comprehensively discuss response surface methodology, or RSM, in the optimization scope in ANSYS Fluent software. Please stay with us. Response surfaces are functions in which the output parameters are described in terms of the input parameters. Using the values obtained from DOE, they estimate approximated values of output parameters throughout the design space without needing a complete solution. In other words, several sample design points are defined as a design of experiment, or DOE. These design points are built in the range of the input parameter variations in which the values of the output parameters are obtained. Then, according to the resulting values at the design points, the response surfaces can evaluate the output parameters for the entire range of the input parameters variation. Note that the accuracy of the response surface depends on two main factors: number of design points in the DOE and response surface type. The response surface type determines the algorithm used to generate the response surface. Several types of response surfaces are available, including genetic aggregation, full second-order polynomials, kriging, non-parametric regression, neural network, and sparse grid. First, we describe genetic aggregation. Genetic aggregation automatically generates and utilizes the type of response surface that is best suited for each output parameter. In other words, genetic aggregation evaluates different types of response surfaces, including full second order, non-parametric regression, kriging, and moving least squares. Then, it automatically creates the most appropriate type of response surface for each output parameter independently. Genetic aggregation is more reliable than classical response surface methods, including full second order, non-parametric regression, kriging, and moving least squares, because it provides higher accuracy. However, it takes more time than the others because it solves different response surfaces to find the best one. Note that the aggregation naming indicates that it evaluates the knowledge of multiple methods aggregately. In addition, genetic aggregation utilizes a genetic algorithm to reach the best response surface. Genetic algorithm is an optimization method inspired by the natural process of evolution. First, an initial population is created. That is, a set of possible solutions is randomly provided. The next step is to calculate each solution based on a fitness function. The next step is selection of the better solutions with a higher chance to produce the next generation. The next step is crossover. That is, the selected solutions are combined together. The next step is mutation, which makes small random changes to the solutions. Finally, this process is repeated for several generations to reach the optimal solution. Therefore, genetic aggregation uses a genetic algorithm that generates populations of different response surfaces. Then, the fitness function of each response surface is evaluated to determine which one provides the best approach. During different generations of the genetic algorithm, less accurate response surfaces are eliminated, and features of more accurate response surfaces are combined to create new, better response surfaces. Next, we describe full second-order polynomials. Regression analysis is a statistical method that analyzes the relationship between two or more quantitative variables so that a dependent variable can be estimated from other variables. We assume that there are n sample design points from DOE, and for each design point, the corresponding values of the output parameters are known. According to these sample points, regression analysis specifies the relationship between the input parameters and the output parameter. Note that the relationship between inputs and outputs depends on the regression model. Typically, a second-order polynomial is preferred as the regression model. However, the second-order polynomial model is an approximation of the input-to-output relationship, and sometimes, only in special cases, obtains an exact relationship. Based on the resulting relationship, the output parameter is approximated as a function of the input variables. This approximation of the output in terms of the input is called the response surface. The quality of the approximation can be improved by applying the transformation function types, including Yeo-Johnson and Box-Cox. For generating the response surface, the full second polynomial first applies scaling and transformation on the input parameters, then calculates the polynomial coefficients based on these modified values. Finally, it applies backscaling and back transformation on the output parameter. Note that some polynomial terms can be filtered. A polynomial consists of several terms containing modified input parameters multiplied by coefficients. The value calculation of these coefficients determines how effective its corresponding term is in estimating the output parameter. The F-test checks the effect of the term against the significance level as a measurement criteria, and, if necessary, filters out the less effective terms. Next, we describe kriging. Kriging is an algorithm that provides a high response quality and fits with higher order variations of the output parameters. Kriging is an accurate multidimensional interpolation method that combines a polynomial model similar to the standard response surface plus local deviations. In other words, in the global model, we fit a simple polynomial across the design points, which does not necessarily intersect all the design points. The kriging method applies the local corrections based on local deviations to the global model to interpolate the design points. Kriging can only support continuous input parameters and cannot support discrete parameters. The kriging method has the capability to identify areas of the response surface that have the highest error by estimating the internal error. It then generates new refinement points and adds them to the areas that need the most improvement. In this way, it improves the quality of the response surface. Next, we describe non-parametric regression. The non-parametric regression algorithm is a technique that prescribes predictable nonlinear behavior of outputs relative to inputs. In other words, it is suitable for problems where the behavior of the outputs is expected to be highly nonlinear to the inputs. Non-parametric regression (NPR) belongs to a class of support vector machine (SVM) techniques. SVMs are data classification methods that utilize hyperplanes to separate groups of data. So the regression method operates similarly to SVMs. The difference is that the hyperplane is utilized to classify a subset of the input sample vectors that are considered sufficient to represent the desired output. In other words, the NPR method uses only the important design points that have the most significant effect on estimating the behavior of the outputs relative to the inputs, instead of all the design points. Note that the NPR method is only for complex problems where low-order polynomials are not dominant. Next, we describe neural network. The neural network is a mathematical technique inspired by the neural network in the human brain. We present a schematic of a sample neural network. The neural network contains 3 levels, including input, hidden, and output. The connections between these levels are weighted, and each arrow is associated with a weight, or W. We consider the inputs level equal to xi. Then, the hidden level contains the function gi in terms of xi. As a result, the output's level solution is calculated as shown. In other words, there is a set of input data and their corresponding outputs based on the design points obtained from the design of experiment, DOE. The neural network adjusts the weights or hidden layers by comparing the inputs and outputs. This is called the learning process. So WJK are the weight functions. By applying these weights or the learned hidden layers, it is possible to estimate the corresponding output for any new input data that is not at the design points. The weight functions use the algorithm to minimize, as the least squares method, the difference between the interpolated value and the known values at the design points. The neural network method uses a limited number of design points for approximation. It can operate better if the number of design points and the number of intermediate cells are high. Note that cells are the neurons in the neural network, used in the hidden layers. Finally, we describe sparse grid. The sparse grid uses an adaptive response surface, meaning the response surface refines itself automatically over time. In other words, the sparse grid method automatically identifies which areas of the response surface need further refinement. This process is called local refinement because it only checks specific areas. Then, it focuses the refinement design points only on these identified areas to improve the accuracy level of the response surface. Since the effort is only on the low accuracy areas, the response surface can reach the required accuracy level faster with fewer design points. In addition, a dimension adaptive algorithm identifies which dimensions are most important for the objective functions. In other words, it identifies the variables that have the greatest impact on the desired outputs so that the computational focus be on them. Note that the sparse grid type can only be used when the DOE is created with the sparse grid initialization method. Therefore, first, the initial design points are controlled based on the sparse grid initialization method. If the expected quality level is not met, the algorithm further refines by applying new levels based on more effective parameters. That is, design points focused on the more important parameters are applied in the form of levels. The refinement process continues until the response surface reaches the desired level of accuracy, or the maximum number of refinement points is applied, or the maximum depth is reached in a level, meaning the maximum number of refinement points are applied for the identified important parameter. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope you are satisfied with our training. The Mr. CFD Group will always be ready to provide you with training services.